When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the extended commercial, but I'm just going to get right to it. I have a lot of people who've been waiting on the line for a while, so I'm going to introduce them one by one. And I think we have enough of a quorum that I'm not going to break StreamYard. So I'm just going to go from left to right here. Make sure I have access. No, it just keeps making my screen bigger, so I can't get at people. All right, so starting with Brian Trent. Brian, welcome, my friend. I'm gonna. Good to see you. I'm gonna just bring everybody up and then try to manage the chaos from there. Michael Z. Williamson, how you doing, my friend? We got Martin L. Shoemaker. It looks like
I know him.
I'm getting cut off at the top, so let's remove that a little bit. All right, and we have Kevin Andrew Murphy. How you doing, my friend?
Hey there.
What else I got going on? I'm just trying to fix all this stuff in real time. There we go. All right, and then Erica and Rob, are you on? Should I add you to the stage?
Erica was having camera trouble.
To get the video to work. Do you know anything about that? Like, it's can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
The sound is on, but when I try putting
she'll come back.
try it again.
Well, it's okay.
Yeah, just log.
So horrendously attractive that we would just break the computer screen if we were otherwise shown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just try.
I'm in through my phone right now.
Oh, their phones work better.
Yeah, I'll see if
Go get my phone.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get on the phones.
Yeah.
Be right back, folks.
Okay. All right. Let's just kind of go around the horn. And then Brian, why don't you start?
Sure.
What's your story? Roughly what inspired it, and then just keep it quick, and then I'll just kind of go around, and then we can open it up to a broader discussion.
You got it. Well, my story is called Flawed Evolution in Weird World War China. The inspiration was actually, I was reading about the Romans fighting the Carthaginians. The beginning of the Punic Wars, they could not compete with the Carthaginians. The Roman Navy was nothing like what it would eventually become. And how they eventually reverse engineered some Carthaginian vessels. So that gave me my starting point for this. My story, of course, is about takes place in the aftermath of a failed UFO invasion attempt where scientists from China and America are trying to reverse engineer it to get a technological advantage. Doesn't go the way they expect.
Yeah, the one thing I thought was most interesting about yours is, which, I mean, for all we know, might even turn out to be true, is a good way to seed a or to take over a civilization is to provide them with technology that transforms them in a way. I'll just leave it at that. Michael Z. Williamson, yours is of a very different character. And for those who have worked with or in the federal government, in the military, will acutely understand it. But just, and it's also a prequel, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a prequel to our paperwork one in the previous one. Yes.
It's literally about lawfare. It's like literally.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy, right.
And without getting too lengthy, China watched our Cold War with the USSR when they could not economically compete or militarily compete with the US. And their collapse was inevitable, but that hastened it. China learned from that, and their Cold War is economic. I mean, they're offering to buy into our businesses. If you order anything from China, the government subsidizes the postage and shipping. They're trying everything they can to have the biggest economic footprint that's possible. And they understand that it's silly to get into a physical conflict or to waste the money on an arms race. But eventually, if things start brushing, then we had the lawyers getting involved and the diplomats getting involved, and the non-government organizations with their animal rights, vegetable rights, every other kind of rights. Everyone's got an opinion to stick into things, and And yeah, you have lawyers fighting it out over who's got precedence and jurisdiction.
But it's like told in a completely tongue-in-cheek way because it's absolutely ridiculous.
Is
but
it?
You can actually see it.
I mean, I remember I remember watching Demolition Man in the theater, and it was ridiculous, over the top, hyperbole. And then when my older kids were teenagers and asked if they could watch it, like, yeah, sure. So I pulled it off the DVD rack, we put it in, and like, I don't remember this being a social commentary. It's gotten worse since then. So
yeah,
I hope it's tongue in cheek, but considering that this last month, after 15 years, the VA finally admitted my respiratory issues were in fact related to my deployment. I mean, the Air Force said they were. My doctor said they were, but the VA said they weren't. And who are you going to believe?
Doesn't the
surgeon?
Doesn't the VA aspire to make war the second worst experience?
Yes. Giving veterans a second chance to die for their country since 1930. So, exactly. We should do one on that at some point, but.
Yeah, it's just but the problem is so sad that it's actually pretty close to true. But
bureaucrats
Rob, what's that?
Bureaucrats everywhere. I mean, civil sector, military, private sector. They're you always run into the red tape. Yeah,
if you think Congress and the president run this country, you are sorely mistaken. It's the bureaucrats. Rob and Erica, welcome. It's good to see you both. All right, so what inspired your story, and what's the title of it, and then just very briefly, kind of what is it about?
Television. It's about kind of a world where you're able to mine into alternate dimensions, and in our story, the United States is contacted by somebody who claims to be from this alternate world that is full of resources, full of everything. You can jump in when you want to, and is trying to deal with us instead of the Chinese. And basically, these alternate world people are kind of playing off the United States and China to their own benefit. And the story is kind of like this world where you can't really trust the person who basically this person's claiming to be an enemy of China and a friend of the United States, but really they're not a friend of anybody because they're not really of this world.
Yeah, so in terms of the inspiration, what I was thinking about is how often we are short-sighted in how we evaluate opportunities and don't always think things through all the way. And so this is, again, taken to exaggeration, taken to parody. But I unfortunately really believe that if we were presented today with a similar option to what's presented in the story, the thoughts would be, how do we do this now, and not, hey, wait a minute, this is a little too good to
Maybe
be true.
Maybe we shouldn't trust these people.
Yeah, and so, it's a bit of a cautionary tale, but, hopefully somewhat exaggerated, but not as much as I would like.
Sound familiar, Brian?
Yeah, it looks like we're playing in the same thematic ballpark.
It's very both of what you guys are doing is very different, but it has kind of a similar Trojan horse like theme, right?
Yeah, no, it's fun to kind of play around with that idea, and there's definitely lots of different ways that you can go with the concept. But given what we see today, I think a rush to act without thinking, unfortunately, is something that can happen, probably tomorrow if we're not careful.
And it's the name of the story, as well as the fact that it's about, like quantum tunnels.
Oh, you and your puns.
I have a screen freeze.
Yep.
I think we're all moving but Sean.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Well, go ahead and continue, Kevin, since he's not here. You're next, so.
Okay. Then I guess I'll go ahead and start up. Hi, Kevin Andrew Murphy. My story is The Greyhound's Gambit, and the inspiration for it actually came from going to a thrift shop and picking up a Falcon of the Plantagenets, Queen Elizabeth II's coronation ashtray or candy dish or whatever it was. And I then looked up all of the Queen's beasts, which are based on the King's beasts, because it was originally Henry VIII had a number of them. And so my story is about a bunch of fairy beasts who are having a shadow war. And so we've got the White Greyhound of Richmond, who's on the English side, who is having to deal with the Dragon Emperor of China and all of his minions, including the rest of the zodiacal 11 other members of the zodiac, from the pig to the dog he doesn't really like, and so forth, and then various other animals who are, the lords of the various fairy courts. And it is pretty much all coming to a head right now at the time when China was going to take over Hong Kong again. And there's an 11th hour bit of, chess match to see who can take control of China.
I was in the living room.
So, of course, like right on schedule, my power went out. So I am literally operating on a whatchamacallit, my cell phone hotspot. So our cell towers aren't out. But one of the themes I was going to get into is the cyber attack that's probably going to happen in April. And the one that over the last year that the Chinese have been probing on Western ports, or West Coast ports and things like that. That was reported in the Washington Post, I think December 11th.
You need my wife here for that discussion.
What's that?
You need my wife here for that discussion.
Yeah.
Oh,
actually,
man.
if I could just finish up on my story, the White Greyhound of Richmond also starts out as one of the Henry's birthday present, because he's actually the spawn of Puck. And on the subject of the birthday parties and so forth, it's my niece's 30th birthday downstairs. So I've played hooky from the chat, from the party, I think, long enough. So I'm going to let everyone go, and I will go ahead and catch up with you later on. And I'm looking forward to watching the rest of the live stream late.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Much appreciated.
Thank
Okay.
you.
See you later.
All right, Martin.
Well, the inspiration for my story is kind of spoilery, but I also think it's kind of amusing and kind of scary. And so I'm going to give a little bit of spoiler, but there's plenty of other stories in the book. So people who might not want to see man anymore after it's spoiled, first, I think you'll still like it. But second, plenty of other good ones there. Long ago, I built a world and a future history that I was going to use for a game, role-playing game. Never used it, but it became the background for most of my Bane stories, most of my analog stories. I call it blue collar space. It's future history with actions on Mars, actions on the moon, actions out in interplanetary space. But I always knew that in the backdrop of this was stories I never got around to writing because I'm not a military guy. So to really write them well would be a little over my head, which is basically a story of a war between the independent cities of the moon and a Chinese-founded O'Neill colony at one of the Lagrange points. And I knew that this story was out there, and I had the idea that there's a war, and I knew part of what started it was that the Chinese orbital colony had genetically engineered a plague and had released it inside of their own colony to basically force all of their less valuable farmer populace that they no longer needed because of their automation, forced them into refugee status. And the forcing them into refugee status sent a wave of refugees to the moon, which wasn't ready to handle them. And in among them were surprises, people who we didn't know were there. And in 1997, I thought this was a ridiculously impossible thing, a Chinese organized plague causing refugee waves and all sorts of other disruptions in the interplanetary economy.
No, you don't need an engineered plague to arrange 9 million refugees streaming into your country if you don't defend your borders. But
But the engineered plague was what I thought was a really creative idea that would never happen in reality. And now it's like the verdict's not in on that one yet. But so that was essentially the premise of what happened in the war that I didn't feel up to writing. And then when Sean says, I need a China war story, I said, well, there's one tiny bit of that is not big war action. It's small person-to-person fighting, which is also the crux of it. And I said, that's a story I can give Sean. And then Sean made me cut it and cut it and cut it because he holds a chainsaw over my head because he knows how long I write.
I didn't cut that much. I just tightened it up a little bit. You know.
The chainsaw Damocles.
Yeah, exactly. So, nice little coincidence that my power goes out when I'm talking about this, the launch of this book.
You are in California, so power is need.
And it's raining. It's raining outside, and we no longer have nuclear power, and we have like plenty of non baseload power because we don't really have that much. We have some coal, but a lot of it's hydropower, which they also closed because of the salmon. And hydropower is probably the cleanest. But anyway, it's basically close to a third world country at this juncture. So, all right. So in terms of next year, just the general geopolitical picture, it's going to get spicy, guys. It's going to get spicy. You have January 13th, we have the Taiwanese elections. And if like the I think I canceled out on my antis. I'll add one more Chinese party wins, it could get spicy. The second thing that's going on is, like I said, the Chinese have been probing. And in that sort of a war, they would go limited on the cyber stuff. Because if you go full out on cyber, then the likely response is either full out, a full out cyber attack from us on the Chinese would not be as devastating as it would be on us. So there might be a nuclear component, or there might be a.
I happen to know a couple of people who work in that field.
Interesting.
Remember when
Three Gorges Dam might be a clean, extremely destructive solution.
Remember when Iran's military network went down?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know the guy who did that.
What about Stuxnet? You know those guys?
Maybe indirectly. That was a different operation, but the Chinese. The problem is that theirs is not decentralized. The government has complete control of everything. All the apps are connected, whether you're buying, communicating, whatever. They're all run through the same channels.
So that does make him an easier target.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. As my wife would be the one on this. So she's IT forensics and security operations. So.
That's the other thing they would probably try to do is mask it, right? Just sprinkle in a bunch of Korean into the code and make it look like it's somebody else. But I know that they've been probing.
4chan, it's all over.
What's that?
If they piss off 4chan, it's all over.
Yeah, they might. Well, I think Google attacked them in 2010 because the Chinese. I think they hacked into their something called Aurora or something like that, and apparently Google hacked back, and the FBI was not very, very pleased with them because you have a non-state actor potentially, causing a kinetic war, right? by just acting alone. It's a good thing they retaliated, but you gotta be careful.
Boy, is that cyberpunk coming true, man. Corporations waging war. That's right out of William Gibson.
Yeah, but it keeps the governments out of it. They can fight each other.
I mean, a smart government would use that as a plausible, deniable. Yeah.
I'm hard to freak out. I enlisted in 1985. I was an airfield engineer during the Cold War, and then in the Gulf War when they stop-lossed me and then didn't deploy me, and then all the happenings in the Middle East, and then I switched branches back and forth between Army and Air Force twice, and then deployed, and we're all gonna die. Okay, so it's Tuesday, right?
Yeah, it's gonna. Well, I think in his New Year's message, Xi was talking about reuniting all this stuff. Like this is the best year for. I mean, this is the best chance he's ever going to have, is this year, right? Because you have the U.S. There are elections everywhere. I think there's over 200 elections this year, starting with Taiwan on January 13th. So you'll have the U.S. kind of divided. We just admitted 9 million people that we can't account for. It's actually exceeded the natural American birth rate at this point. So we have people in our country, we have no idea where they're from. So I would be shocked if the Chinese didn't slip a few people through. The other thing or issues is the Chinese has been steadily selling treasuries, reducing exposure there. It's building up food stores. It's been stockpiling coal. It's been through its Belt Road Initiative or whatever it's called. They've tethered themselves a little bit closer to Russia, and they're getting cheap natural gas because of all of our sanctions. And at the same time, we're distracted with this business in Ukraine and then also in Israel, Gaza. So we've been supplying both areas with weapons, but we haven't been building up capacity, at least at a much more advanced rate on weapons production, things like that. There's also been a number of suspicious fires. I think there was one in Missouri where these ammunition plants have kind of been burning down. So
weapons production has been a problem for a long time. We've got higher and higher tech weapons, and they're very effective, but they cannot be replaced quickly. I mean, World War II, we were cranking stuff out every few hours. That cannot be done with the modern stuff. At the same time, the F-22 in recent NATO exercise, it was 243-2. That's how far we outclass everybody else.
I noticed you're not saying the F-35, the Hangar Queen.
No, actually, the F-35's got the lowest incident rate of any military aircraft we've ever flown. Now, part of that is because they are being careful how they use it, but it does work. And everything has, teething problems at the beginning. But, Russia and Ukraine tying themselves up, China's exploiting it for profit. I mean, that was predictable. Iran's exploiting it for profit, not as much, but you have to figure every nation involved is trying to get political and economic leverage.
All right, let's take a quick break. And Brenda, we each went through kind of what our stories were, what inspired the story, brief kind of what the story was roughly about without giving it away, and then obviously just introduce yourself and really quickly. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great.
Yes.
It is. It's always an excitement whether you can be heard or not. My story.
By the way, I had a power outage at the very beginning. That's why.
There's constant excitement with this kind of thing. I believe I wrote the first version of this story in 1977, and I submitted it to a contest at Boscone where I won a prize. So that's when I knew I had a career here. And it is about the concept of feng shui. I don't know if everybody knows that, but it's the thing about earth currents and in this country, it tends to be about the arrangement of furniture and rooms, and it's something like horoscopes. It's essentially it's something that old ladies do. My mother was a big fan, And if you're very into it, you would go hire a feng shui expert before you built your house or your skyscraper, or you sited your grandfather's tomb, so that it would be in line with the earth currents. And it occurred to me that you could weaponize this really nice.
Yeah. Speaking of, all right, and now I'm going to go really, really woo real quick because that's a perfect segue. All right. So this is a question I got. All right. Where did I read about China using children for their remote viewing program? Anyway, they apparently do. Okay. So, all right. So if folks aren't familiar with the Stargate program, the U.S. military developed a technique called remote viewing, which is the ability to see, through space and time without, having to move around. It was studied by physicists. The CIA tried to downplay it when it came out, or when it was revealed that we had this program in 1995. There were one physicist, said it had statistically significant results. Another didn't. But anyway, what inspired the U.S. military to develop that program were reports that the Chinese were trying to develop psychic abilities in children. According to Russell Targ. Russell Targ was the laser physicist at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, who, in concert with Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, and others, developed the remote viewing protocol that the U.S. military spent at least $20 million on and used over a period of 20 years. So anyway, that's the answer to that question. So the U.S. government really did do that. You can look it up on the CIA website. People who follow this channel know I've interviewed everybody in that program, or at least most of the people in that program. So it's real. Whether or not the U.S. military still uses it, I do not know. But they likely probably still do, or they use contractors to augment. It's not the only source that they use, right? They use mosaic theory, much like an investor would, where you use multiple sources of intelligence and you develop a picture from those multiple sources of intelligence. But anyway, sorry, it's a long answer. Now, adding to this business this year, the best time if China were to cross the strait and invade Taiwan, the best time to do it with based on the tides and things like that is in April. Basically, and because you have May, and then August, it's also a little bit easier, but or with at least the tides, but you only have 1 month. So anyway, things are have the potential to get a little spicy next year. Michael, you were talking about something before I kind of segued into.
Yeah, I mean, just that anytime there's any kind of interaction, governments, NGOs, corporations, everyone else is looking for an angle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're all trying to cash in, either politically or economically. I mean, that's just the nature of things. So, Ukraine and Russia are fighting. China's happy to exploit Russia for money and in exchange for resources at a greatly inflated rate. They're one of the things they were providing is tires. The Russians did not have enough military tires. China was providing them substandard copies of Dunlops at inflated rates.
And they were shitty tires, I hear.
Yeah, no, they were. Yeah, well, they were better than the ones the Russians had, which were dry rotted and falling apart because they don't do routine maintenance. Yeah. I mean, when I was in an Army Guard unit, we drove our trucks every month. That was part of the drill, was getting in the trucks, rolling them around, starting them up, making sure everything still functions. And the Russians apparently don't do that even with their frontline troops. So it uses fuel. So. And
they don't really know PMCS, right? They don't really.
They rolled into Ukraine and they lost tires, bearing seals, bearings, fuel line, everything. They just fell apart.
Yeah,
at the very
and they
minimum,
also
you're going to roll your tires around so they're not just resting on the same spot every.
The joke about only flat on the bottom actually becomes true eventually.
Yeah.
Right.
And even just checking tire pressure, just. Rotating tires, just doing.
Yeah, China's
simple
cashing in on
stuff
that. Iran's cashing in on that. I mean, everybody sees an opportunity. So
it's Yeah, it's gonna. I think there's other. So again, going with this, there are modern day remote viewers who do this stuff for a living, and there are two with this group called the Future Forecasting Group. They have clients, all that stuff. So Daz Smith, Edward Reardon. I just did an interview with them, and they saw potential cyber attacks happening in April, which would make sense, right? And a lot of what they saw was, or I can't remember precisely, but there was at least the probing that the U.S. military has been getting recently has been focused on Western, West Coast ports, West Coast infrastructure, things like that, which is what you would do if you were China and didn't want to start a full scale war, but wanted to try to limit it to our capacity to respond to.
And my wife can't talk about everything she does for security because she works for a contractor, but it's not uncommon when someone starts a DDoS as a prank that somebody else piles on. There's people aware of what's going on, and then either other groups or other governments use that as an opportunity to try and push for leverage.
Michael, with the attempt of the people who want to take down systems that have ties to the Israeli government or Israeli businesses, be a good opportunity for cover for some of this? Because I know
absolutely.
That's what I had a feeling.
Mm-hmm. They've got the Israelis have a pretty good system on that. I'm not in that field, but I know people who are. But they've got a fairly robust electronic security apparatus. Yes, they have to. And ours, the military and the contractors and even non-military corporations get hacks all the time. I mean, Yeah, my wife's official position is lead IT forensics investigator and manager of the Security Operations Center. Her job is to be on top of this. It's an ongoing thing.
And it's not all computer science and monitoring the electronics and stuff like that. Like you have intelligence agencies will use honeypots in the sense that they'll have real people who are on chat groups that talk about cyber attacks and with hackers and stuff like that, and they pose as hackers, and sometimes they can get wind. So it's just classic good old human intelligence many times where there's
actually a intelligence brief friend of mine sent me and shows two attractive people, male and female. It says, "You are not attractive enough for these people to be interested in you." If they're coming on to you, they want something.
And it's very broad-ranging probes going on, because I am a nobody. Right. I have zero military value of any sort. And in the past month and a half, the number of anonymous and unknown people signing up for my newsletter and trying to join my Facebook groups and everything has gone through the roof. And they all have similar characteristics of people who don't quite have realistic looking names and such, or the gender doesn't match the name. It's like, if I'm getting probed and I'm a nobody, they're probing everywhere.
And some of that's just
on software that governs like auto controllers, right, inside vehicles, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if there's any connection between my writing world and that world at all. I guess it's not a zero connection, but I don't know if there's much connection there.
Back in May, I was attending MarCon in Columbus and just showed up late. Someone tried to hack our home network. So this was the electronic equivalent of Tremors. So, broke into the wrong network, didn't you? It did not work out the way they intended.
I will say, from someone who works in the financial sector, the number and the increased sophistication of the attempted phishing has been exponential over the last several months. I mean, they're getting really good. The fake DocuSigns that we've gotten of late, they look, normally those things there's always like a really easy tell. And this one, I had to look up, down, left, and center to ensure. It's like, nope, this one isn't real. And then once I knew what to look for, it was easier to spot. But man, it is really getting dicey out there if you've got somebody who's click happy. And so, I'm constantly reminding staff, don't click on things, don't click on things, don't click on things, because they're looking more and more realistic by the day. It's getting really.
And there's also authorization fatigue. They just keep hitting you with requests until eventually you click on it to make it go away or hit it by accident.
Now,
it is something else right now.
Now, Rob, what you're seeing, is it due to just increased activity from hackers in general? Is it increased activity from hackers who are better enabled through AI tools, or is it something you think is state directed?
It's hard for me to say. I think the AI tools are making it better and easier. I don't think it's necessarily a targeting thing, especially since all in all, honestly, we're on the smaller edge of things. But I think it is an increase in sophistication and an increase in the ability to kind of do an out of the box thing with minimal setup. But it's just something that we keep an eye on constantly amongst a number of security factors and ensure that we have as many protections as possible, up to and including our cyber insurance, which is not something we would have been talking about probably 5 years ago, but something that we are ensuring that is in place, and constant reviews with our IT team, just being diligent and looking for patterns. But the DocuSigns is the latest one, and that I've never seen before. And so that one kind of caused me to raise a real eyebrow. The usual fake email stuff, that's child's play. That's easy to spot. But when you're talking about right down to the little copyright signs and everything, that is...
I've actually gotten a few fake things in my email.
Really?
Yeah. And
Okay.
I'm not even something
I had one a few weeks ago. My phone pinged and then it rang and said it was the bank and that there had been a questionable transaction. And I logged in and was like, yeah, that's not me. They said, kill the card, we'll send a new one. Is this your address? And they wanted me to verify my device by logging my phone into a third-party site. And I'm going,
nope.
So they had literally filed a false transaction, then called me up to use the false transaction to try and milk more information.
Props to them. That's pretty darn clever. We have not
called the bank directly, and they're like, "Yeah, that wasn't us." So they were using an 808 number, which is Hawaii, and 801, which is Utah. They're obviously spoof numbers, but because it's 8 people, some people might assume it's a toll-free number, and it was a fairly sophisticated setup. But I was on. It's like, Jess, is this possibly this does not sound the slightest bit above board for a third party to be verifying a device, and I've never done that before. Why do they care what I use to log in? So, but yeah, they were standing by.
Yeah, I know that Rob, you're talking about cyber insurance. I know that when I worked at Symantec back in 2014. We actually had a unit that we stood up that was starting to look into that, but it was still very early days and it didn't do, I guess it was a hard sell at that time. Right now, I can only imagine it must be something that's basically required, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a statutory requirement or not, Sean, but it sure as heck is a best practice. And one of the things that we are constantly looking at as a company is what we can do to protect folks and to ensure that everything is covered. But nothing is 100%, and that's why you get the insurance just in case, because you just don't know. But I know we've had it for several years now. I don't know exactly when we picked it up, but it makes me feel a little better knowing we've got something to attempt to help. And I would hope anybody that does what we do is similarly inclined.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's a lot of stuff that can happen next year, and it'll be enough chaos internally in the U.S. to kind of allow the Chinese to, maybe take a stab at Taiwan, particularly depending on who wins the election on January 13th. But if I were Xi, if I had any intention of doing anything, this is the 1 year I would do it. After that,
as much as they want to, China lacks the force projection, and the Taiwanese military is a lot better quality. I mean, China can't really get the troops over there. They could bomb it, but they can't really. There's no way they can readily occupy, especially given the size. I mean, Taiwan is a big enough country. You're talking millions of troops. Yeah, remember the struggle we had.
If I was going to select a time to attack the United States, I would have waited for like summer of 2020 when we were in the throes of COVID. And everyone was like, locked down at home and, wrestling with masks, and there was no inoculations. That was a real moment of weakness. And if they had been on the dime then, which of course they were not, because they too had virus. But assuming you could have gone over that hump, that would have been a very nice time. And, who was president at that time, we were completely half-hearted, everything was in chaos. That was a real weak moment. We were lucky.
Yeah, I think this time is a little bit more dangerous, just because
Christmas is always popular.
What's that?
Christmas is always popular for hacks.
Yeah.
Like
I said, I think like this year we're gonna be very obviously distracted, and I think that with the two other conflicts brewing, we're spending a lot of resources supplying those conflicts. And I think the other issue is even if they're unsuccessful, there will certainly be a huge number of missile strikes, right? Because the Chinese quite rightly built up a huge number of cheap missiles that they could fling at targets. The other thing too is I wouldn't expect a fully conventional attack, right? I don't know how long you could put somebody in one of those cargo containers, but I would imagine there's such brisk trade between Taiwan and China that might be one means of infiltration for some element of units to get in there. So I don't know. Like, I agree with you, Michael, that it's hugely daunting. Like, they haven't really fought I wouldn't even say a major war since 1979 in Vietnam, and they did not do well there. They did fight against the Indians recently in the in the line of actual control. I think it was back in, I can't remember if it was 2021 or over that period of time. But
and India's also got border disputes going on with Myanmar and a couple other places. So there's a bunch of low intensity stuff all over that region.
And I want to point out, Sean, that I would kind of call it 2.5 conflicts that we're in right now, because the Houthis in the Red Sea, apparently
the Iranians,
right, intercepting everything that comes out, but we aren't fighting back. And what this is doing is making shipping so expensive and difficult that people are saying, maybe we're not going to put the traffic through. And that becomes a form of economic warfare. If we can't get the shipping from there because we aren't willing to stop it, but we are willing to just tolerate it, well, the shippers aren't willing to tolerate it.
Yeah.
So that's not a full-blown conflict, but it's an economic conflict.
Yeah. So, again, we're distracted. This might be the one shot they have, because after 2024, we'll presumably have a president, and then we'll be a little bit less distracted. The problem is we're not the only country that's having an election. I think there's over 200 elections next year, so there's going to be a lot of indecisiveness, and it's gonna be a weird one.
It also depends on the for each nation or polity. It depends on the transition process and time frame.
Yeah,
or is it usually fairly straightforward?
Quick.
May you live in interesting times.
I'm tired of living in interesting times, man.
I think there's some boredom.
Yeah, I want to live in boring times because this is not.
I doubt there's
not
ever
great.
been such a thing.
I don't know. 90s are pretty nice. You know,
It's just boring where you are is where you would like.
Yeah,
to,
the
it wasn't,
90s.
it wasn't really. It
collapse
wasn't
of
all that
Soviet
nice in the
Union.
Middle East in the 90s, you know. But
I was almost
well,
in the Middle East.
I don't think things were ever nice in the Middle East.
I
91
was almost
is
in the Middle East. A friend of mine was in Bosnia, and then I was in Kuwait in '99 for Operation Desert Fox. I mean, the '90s wasn't that boring.
Yeah, that's true. And you had, you guess you had Bosnia, then you had Kosovo, then you had Somalia. Well, Somalia was before
Again.
those two.
Yeah, Somalia again,
Right.
because it had been '83 as well. Yeah, and then '93. Yeah.
Yep.
It's
And
interesting. I mean,
then
the further
you had-
back you go, it's always been like this.
Yeah.
You have.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go back to Alexander the Great. You can go back to Cyrus. You got to Sargon of Akkad. It doesn't matter. It's always been. One of the consequences of us being a socially driven species and an aggressive species at that is, well, take a look around, right?
Yeah.
And I don't remember which science fiction author it was, probably Heinlein, something to the effect of peace is that period when the civilians don't know the war is going on.
Purnell said that.
Jerry Purnell. Jerry Purnell. Yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, how many conflicts have we been involved in? The Americans don't even, right? We were in like the Sahel, right, in Africa, like, operating there fairly extensively, but American people didn't really.
I'd like to think that both Erica and I keep tabs on what's going on in the world fairly decently, and definitely more than average for a typical American. But sometimes there's just simply so much going on in so many places, and we've got a few observational boots, as it were, on so many places that trying to keep track can be just a fool's errand. I lost track of Nigeria again until recently, and now I'm paying attention to that again, which means I'm going to be paying less attention somewhere else. It's just overwhelming, and it's not my day job to keep tabs on all this. But
And there's very little we can actually do either.
right. Well, there's that.
But it's interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever forecast this, but we ostensibly live in an information age, which I'm putting in parentheses, but in quotation marks. But people are on their phones all the time with no social media hygiene whatsoever, on the phones constantly. And I don't.
Yep.
In my anecdotal experience, very few people are, I don't know, reading about what's going on. They're just liking kitten photos or debating in certain echo chambers, but they don't really spend part of that time learning some of the complexities of the world right now. I mean, there's whether you're talking about Israel and Gaza, I mean, there's like a 5-part report on the UN's website. Somebody wanted to read it, but people are content to actually argue in certain bubbles of confirmation bias and echo chambers. So I don't know if anybody predicted that an information age would just sort of collapse into these the mirrors of narcissists. It's very correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there probably somebody has done it, but
and the stuff that
Right.
you're seeing seeing is curated. It's not, you're not seeing, like, a lot of the information I get does not come from the media. Like, I'll talk to people. So as an example, over the last several years, they actively considered shelving a division in the Army because of the recruiting crisis. You didn't hear about that in the media, but that's pretty serious business, right? Same thing with all these ammunition plant fires that are kind of suspicious and kind of weird and oddly timed. You don't hear about that in the media because it's, there's some scary stuff. Like, you couldn't even talk about the lab leak theory in 2020. You had PhDs in infectious disease at Stanford, saying, like, what? You're banned from, like, social media. And so that's part of the problem too. It's like there are people in the bureaucracy, in the permanent bureaucracy, that are attempting to assert themselves in the narrative. So
It's a philosophical observation that as time goes on, a lot of basic functions that we depended on the government for have become more and more private sector, dispersed, homegrown, and the bureaucracy hates that and squeezes real harder for control. There's a lot of functions they do that really, ITAR, among other things.
Here's
a ball of
here's
snakes.
a non-controversial example. Okay, so, and people on my channel will know this. Like, this is more for. How many of you know that in July, I think on July 27th, in front of the House Oversight Committee, a former Air Force colonel testified that we had a crash retrieval program and had recovered non-human craft and alien bodies. Are any of you aware of that?
Yes, but that's because of some guy named Sean.
Peripherally, I saw some of the video they were releasing of objects, but I didn't hear about that. No.
Yeah, so it was not covered, or was barely covered by any mainstream media entity, which is odd, because that would be the biggest story in the history of humanity. But what this guy did is he worked for an organization called ATIP. I think it was like the Aerial Anomal Threat, something office, whatever. And he interviewed about 40 different people who had direct access to these programs, and a lot of these materials are stovepiped and hidden in private companies, which that's a whole other issue, where they're recovered by.
Gee, that was in Terminator 2.
Was it really?
That was part of the plot of Terminator 2. Yeah. So they found the robot. They were reverse engineering the robot from the robot.
Oh, from the future. Yeah, from the future. Yeah. Yeah. That, by the way, that's a hypothesis. By the way, that that they're from the they're not from other stars. They're from the future. There's also
that would mean why there would be a different emphasis on it, and that that's a more, I guess in some ways, a less threatening issue to deal with. Oh, it's us.
That was also in the book Sphere by Michael Crichton.
I did that in one of my novels. So
that the UFO crashed. Had been in the ocean for 300 years, but they were pretty sure it was an American craft. And spoiler alert, it was human, not alien.
Well, it could also, the implications could also be horrifying, right? Like, they might be coming back to ensure that a cataclysm happens so that they exist in the future, because the cataclysm resulted in their evolutionary,
development
path, right?
Yeah. I need to go in a couple
minutes. Yeah. When you're ready to just feel free to hop off. And anyway, there's a lot of reasons. Like, why can't you just say that we're not alone, right? It could be that we just don't know enough. It could be that there is some secret that is far worse than we're. Yes, we're not alone, but. Right. So it could be the cataclysm, right? If you knew that there was going to be a cataclysm that wiped out 3/4 of the human species, there's really no way you can tell the American public that without causing a mass panic. The other thing it could be is, maybe we're not in charge and they don't want people to know that. And, kind of given the way the world is right now, it is like such a clown show that, I wouldn't be surprised by something like that. Anyway, but if you literally go to the House Oversight Committee on YouTube, you can watch the hearing. But mainstream media just didn't touch it. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. I feel like I laid a bombshell, but this is old hat for me. Does anybody know anything more about that? About the Grush hearings or anything like that? Or
well, the Grush hearings, I watched them, of course, and all that. Yeah. But
I think a lot of it is that it's people are not the idea that aliens would be here in actuality, like even if there's a lot of evidence for it, it does strain the imagination. It is a thing that like, oh, that can't be real. That can't be. I mean, I'm kind of like, I would need a lot of proof to really,
Yeah.
trust that something. Because again, that would be essentially the most, important thing that ever happened in human history. It's like, yeah, it's really going to happen now, and I'm here. Like, I mean, it could.
Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead, Brenda.
Really unusual happenings demand a high level of proof. I think it's reasonable to demand a freaking high level of proof for something this big. Whereas, Taylor Swift and a new hair color, we need no proof. We're cool.
Right.
I can't speak to their presence or absence, but the more we learn from James Webb and Hubble about what's out there and all of our probes and everything, I have pretty much reached a conclusion that there are only two possibilities. There's life out there, or we were created by a deity. There are too many places that are enough like us that whatever happened here could happen there, unless what happened here had a cause that is beyond science.
See, that's interesting because I'm more of a subscriber to the rare earth hypothesis, which opens up a lot of things too, with the specific circumstances of not just our Goldilocks zone in our solar system, but in the galaxy itself. So, it's interesting, but I definitely am on the side of like, show me the smoking gun, show me the proof. I keep my mind open as a sci-fi writer, definitely.
I have I haven't, it hasn't aired yet, but I did an interview with a physicist. His name is Dr. Kevin Knuth. And he actually ran a series, I think, of Monte Carlo simulations. And the question that he asked was, if there are, given the probabilities, just kind of the probability that you have an M-class star and you have a rocky planet within a certain distance, then you have a probability of life developing and, long enough that it becomes a spacefaring civilization. So he kind of did this and then ran a Monte Carlo simulation on a bunch of different outcomes. And what he found is that the most likely outcome is that at least one spacefaring civilization would have discovered our planet about 200 to 300,000 years ago.
Really? I just wrote that story.
Really?
And yes, it ran in Clark's World in July. And in this story, the aliens arrived. In fact, they arrived in January of 2023. Do you remember that thing where there were Chinese drones on the West Coast and somebody actually shot one down and there was all this, and then it all went away? You remember that?
Yeah.
And I decided that was that moment, and they were just unlucky. The aliens arrived. And the key trick with them was that they were not very big. They're not like elephant sized or even us sized. They're about the size of the cat here. And they arrived and they were going to come down and do that take me to your leader thing. Hi, we're here. And we were going crazy about Chinese drones, and they sent things up and they shot everything out of the air. And the poor aliens have retreated. They're someplace like behind the moon or someplace and waiting for us to get our act together. But because of and this is where the hand wavium comes in, a small glitch in the star drive flung one of their vessels back. And I was 3,000 years. And I think they arrived along about the time of the Roman kings. And the unfortunate alien needed a power source, and there are not that many at that period of time. So he selected a thermal source, volcanic. Hijinks ensue.
Okay.
Interesting.
So, yeah, we were in my story. I don't want to say too much, but the idea of the cost benefit ratio of trying to invade an alien planet, where I have aliens, these 3 UFOs, very David Cronenberg like UFOs. They're fleshy and organic. They come here and they're radically changing the environment to very non-human standards, and they've been shot down. So it's the aftermath of their attempted invasion. But then we're sort of doing all the legwork now and China and America trying to beat each other to the technological punch and using alien technology to infuse our own programs. So in a way, the invasion is still going on, which is, an interesting way to try to take over a world.
There's an Army military intelligence officer. His name was, or maybe he started Army and maybe subsequently shifted to Air Force because he was around during the alleged Roswell crash. His name is Colonel Corso. He has a book called The Day After Roswell. And one of the contentions he makes in that book is that a lot of the technology that we developed was inspired by what we found in some of this craft wreckage. So the other interesting thing is we're talking about evidence. There's a professor at Stanford. His name's Professor Gary Nolan. He was a Nobel Prize nominee or runner-up to nominee, something like that. And he runs Nolan Labs over at the medical school. And he's been given materials that supposedly were kind of sloughed off a craft or something like that. So he put it through this very fine-tuned molecular, kind of similar to like some spectral analyzer or whatever. But I think it could resolve some atoms down to within 5 angstroms, something like that, like extremely fine-tuned. And what they found was with silicon, for instance, they had really weird isotopic ratios that you wouldn't naturally find on Earth. So it could mean one of two things. One, that whatever that was did not come from our solar system, because everything in this solar system has roughly the same isotopic ratio. Or two, it was engineered to be that way, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would you need different isotopes of silicon in order to, maybe there's some property of silicon that we didn't, or not silicon, but property of matter that we still don't quite understand. Alternatively, there's another alleged material that's been sent anonymously to some of these scientists, which was like a layer of bismuth and maybe magnesium. I can't remember exactly what it is. But if you apply a terahertz frequency to this material, it resonates in a really, really strange way. And we don't use terahertz frequencies very much because it's kind of hard to generate. Those machines that you see at the airport tend to be very low terahertz frequencies. So there's a lot of stuff that's out there that just, again, the people who are kind of reporting on this stuff, it has been so stigmatized that they're just not covering it. But there's some, serious people. And I'm not saying it's aliens. I have no idea. Another example, there's a phenomenon called USOs, right? You saw some of it with the Nimitz encounter, where you have these craft that, fall into the water. But there's an Admiral Gallaudet. He was also, I think, head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they're getting a lot of returns with sonar with these things, but they're traveling at, very fast speeds for something that's operating through medium like water. So one theory is that, if there's something out there, they've been here for a very long time and, likely have bases or whatever you want to call it in the oceans, right? It's a vast, unexplored environment down. But submarines get these things all the time. And one question I was curious about, but won't get answered, is there's a lot of activity with these UAPs over nuclear installations, right? So back in 1967, there's a missileer, his name is Bob Salas, who was at an incident where one of these UAPs remotely shut off the 10 Minuteman nuclear missiles that he had. And I believe Boeing tried to replicate it to see if they could, because, these things are rad hardened. They're each missile has an independent targeting system. They're not linked together. The cabling is buried 60 feet under the ground, so it's impossible for a conventional a conventional adversary to remotely shut them off. So what they tried to do is, by sticking a particular signal right next to the wire, the Boeing Corporation was able, through a bench test, to replicate that, but it also just shut down the guidance system. It didn't shut down anything else, and it didn't permanently damage the missiles. But there's been this intense activity around nuclear materials where you have lots of sightings and things like that. So my question would be to the submariner or submariner, whatever they call themselves, community, is I wonder if nuclear powered submarines and submarines with submarine based ballistic missile or submarine launched ballistic missiles see these things more than average. And my educated guess would be to probably say yes, but that stuff would never get released. That's too sensitive. I know the Russians definitely saw that, but anyway, there's a lot of stuff out there that's that you would think is crazy, but it's
but that makes for great conversations, especially among our community, right? So
yeah,
there's always room for fiction when you're doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely is. All right, let's go around the horn and just see see what people have coming out, and then we can. Martin, we'll start with you. Do you have anything coming out or anything people should check out?
I'm in the latest issue of Analog with a story called Sluggish, which my first reader says is the grossest thing he has ever read. The 4 writer friends who inspired the story want me never to actually mention their names because they want nothing to do with it. I am a guy who normally writes what let's call physics hard science fiction. Mm-hmm. Physics can hurt you. Biological science fiction can splash all over you. Biological hard science fiction is gross. Mm-hmm. And if people hate me for Sluggish, they're in good company because it's gross.
Remind me what the first line of your story in this book is.
In this book, the first line is "My balls itched,"
and then it just goes all downhill from there.
Well,
so to speak.
I established the voice and the character in one line there. This was very clearly a person who was down to earth and not afraid to let you know it.
Yeah, it sounds, military-like for sure.
Yeah.
Rob and Erica, each of you, what are you working on?
So I don't have anything that's immediately in the pipeline. But Erica, I think you just had something come out recently, correct?
Yeah, well, I had a story actually come out yesterday in Kaleidotrope. It's a story about kind of a plague. It was a story that I wrote prior to 2020, and it took a long time for me to really want to start sending it out again because it was a plague story, and that just didn't feel right for 2020. But it's a plague that kind of splits personalities, and the main character is somebody who had her personality usurped by her current personality. So it's kind of a psychological story. I also had a story come out in Apex magazine last month that was surprisingly hard science fiction for Apex, but it's a story about kind of humans on Titan, where where your body can't survive, so people download themselves into robots, and one of the main character's daughter downloads herself into a non-human robot, which causes a scandal because human supremacy says that we have to look like humans in other worlds, when in fact other types of beings could be just as good or better at adapting to the environment.
And that one has one of my all-time favorite titles from you, which is
Papas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Slug Monsters.
Oh, very good.
Because the character, the daughter looks like a slug monster.
Yes, and of course, as you hear her say it, you're hearing the song. It is one of my absolute favorite titles that Erica's come up with over the years. So,
and I think that's it. I don't have anything coming out soon. I've been a bit of a fallow period and trying to work on longer things. Have a novella that I want to really write a sequel to and potentially either self-publish or find a publisher. But that's pretty much it. Just have a couple of short stories that hopefully I'll be sending out soon. So.
Yeah, her first reader needs to kick her in the posterior and has been slacking on that a little bit. So I'll tell him to get to work.
Good. Good.
Brian?
Coming out soon. Well, I mean, I would of course encourage readers to check out my novel Red Space Rising, which is a hard military sci-fi novel about mind uploading and a civil war on Mars, essentially. I have a story coming out in
put a pin in that because I have an interesting anecdote about Mars. But
sure,
yeah,
okay.
No, keep going. And then we'll soon.
I have a story coming out in Real Tales of the U.S. Space Force, and that's coming out this year. And I sold. So actually, I'm particularly proud of that story because I don't do a lot of near future sci-fi. Mine tends to be, post-human and pretty far in the future. But this did a lot of research for this one, and enough so that I've scared myself into what might be possible when it comes to hacking. So that's coming out soon. I finished a novel, so I'm going to be pitching that soon, and a lot of other projects out right now, but nothing imminent. So I would say you can check out my website, briantrent.com for upcoming news.
Okay. I'll get back to the Mars thing after Brenda goes.
I had a novel come out in 2023 in the spring, and the title of it was A Door in His Head. And the ebook edition is coming out through Bookview Cafe next week. It had been published by Grandview University because it won their Diverse Voices Prize. So they put out this paper edition. But I had the ebook hung onto the e-rights, and so now we are pushing out the ebook edition.
Oh, congrats!
And I think that I already pushed the sequel out in June or July, and we'll just have to see. I think this is the first year in some years I don't actually have a book coming out, a new book coming out. But I sort of fell off the sled this past year.
Yeah, we all do. We all do from time to time. All right, so everybody should definitely check those things out. One thing I want to show folks here. So this is today.
Excellent.
So we're number 2 at least on new releases in science fiction short stories. Larry Correa and so these are 2 Baen titles. So I'll take the win. However, on anthologies. Science fiction anthologies, it's reversed. So we are number 1. So I want to appreciate your efforts as authors that wrote some amazing stories in these anthologies or in this anthology. And I want to also thank the audience that's watching right now for getting it. And if you haven't gotten it, what's wrong? I'm just kidding. But I appreciate anybody who goes out and gets it. So we're number 1 new release here. Mm-hmm. So I just want to thank everybody for that. All right. I promised Brian I'd go back. Here he's back again. I promised Brian I would. Go ahead. What'd you say?
Oh no! Just when you were mentioning Larry Correa too, I should have mentioned I'm also in the upcoming Black Tide Rising anthology, United We Stand, which is coming out this year as well.
Okay, yeah, the Ringo anthology.
Nice. John Ringo. Sorry, John Ringo. Yeah.
Okay, so Mars. All right, this is just it's not my theory. This is just a theory. Okay, so in the solar system, there are several isotopic ratios that are relatively stable, like xenon 132 to 128, things like that. I think that's generally 1-to-1. However, in places where we tested hydrogen bombs, that ratio is off. It's like I can't remember which of the two, or which one is 2 to 2.5 times the other, but that and a number of other chemicals like argon and the isotopic ratios get skewed. So there are some rocks from Mars about stretching back to something like 2 billion years ago, they have the same isotopic ratio as everything else in the solar system, which is kind of that 1-to-1. However, if you look between 200 to 500 million years ago, they also had really weird isotopic ratios exactly like that. So there's a scientist that I interviewed. His name is Dr. John Brandenburg. He wrote a paper on it, and he used to work at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And as he was looking at the data, one of his colleagues who was working on nuclear weapons kind of just looked at it and just like, oh yeah, that's a nuclear weapon signature. And he's just like, what? So then he looked into it a little bit more, and there are 2 specific places on the surface of Mars where you have evidence of, I shouldn't say evidence of, but it appears that there was some sort of a nuclear event. A reactor meltdown doesn't have that kind of signature, but nuclear weapons do. So would kind of like an Orion type drive that would crash into a planet would also likely have that kind of signature. And they happen to be the 2 places that are nearby. It's kind of in the ocean, the northern oceans, right off the coast of Cydonia Mensa and Galaxis Chaos. Both places are where there are alleged, some people, NASA would say it's been debunked, it's just a shadow. But there's the D&M pyramid and the face on Cydonia, right? And then you have another face, what appears to be a face in Galaxis Chaos. So it was so long ago, who knows? But there is a narrative that there was some sort of either a war or a crash on Martian surface.
So, Sean, what's interesting about that is that a lot of the stories I publish in Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction that connect to Red Space Rising, a major nuclear war on Mars is like a pivotal event in that future universe, like a global, a red world nuclear exchange. So that's
So watch. So if you look up John Brandenburg, I have a playlist.
Okay.
There are 2 episodes where he first goes into evidence of because there's also like a methane cycle apparently on Mars.
Yeah, every spring,
which doesn't make sense unless you have some form of residual life.
Right, geological or biological explanations. They haven't gotten it down yet, but yeah, every spring. So it's either the sunlight, causing this reaction. Maybe things are growing underground, or some kind of release of gas because of the heating. That's how the methane blooms on Mars is interesting.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying this is correct or the right answer, but
we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, and NASA is really incurious about it because they have geologists who are running this. They don't really have biologists who are running this sort of thing. So, yeah, Martin, I'm not as optimistic about the James Webb Telescope. I think if they found like a biosignature, they just wouldn't report it. They would just kind of just let it go.
They've reported things that are on the path to biosignatures already. Things that are like, we're seeing this, and biology is one possible explanation. Mm-hmm. Now that's not conclusive, obviously, right. but I've been surprised by how many things they have been reporting that seem like they could be biological.
It'd be great, I think. I wouldn't be at all surprised the universe is teeming with life. Whether or not it's intelligent life is a civilization during life, a different question.
Yeah, I think that's a whole different matter.
Whole different thing, whole different set of circumstances. I mean, I personally find it kind of depressing when you look at how long before the Cambrian explosion, how long life was here, and it didn't really do much, right? So I have to believe there's a lot of single-celled organisms and a lot of alien seas that never achieved multicellular speciation, or did move to land but never managed to get the right circumstances between all the different filters that has to go through to achieve any kind of sense of permanence that we define as civilization. So
well, again, the pushback I would have on that is we live on a spiral arm right, of a massive galaxy that's 100,000 light years like wide, and the probability that someone got here first and brought life here with them, kind of the panspermia, you know, hypothesis. Yeah. I think is, there's some likelihood. There's some likelihood there, especially if, I would imagine that I think I don't know if our star is younger relative to stuff that's in the galactic core. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Martin, do you have any does anybody know?
It's definitely a next generation star because of some of the elements that are in it, and the elements that are in our worlds are things that have to come from previous supernovas and novas. So I have a perspective. When I was a kid, everybody would tell you that Earth was the only place with water. The scientists said so. What the scientists actually said, if you were able to actually listen to them, was, we have no proof that water is anywhere but Earth, so we can only claim that there is water on Earth, but we see no reason why there shouldn't be anywhere else. But they start with the we have no proof, and so it was the accepted wisdom that the universe is a dry place, there's no water anywhere but Earth. And now we can't go a day without somebody detecting water in another part of the solar system or another part of some other solar system. I kind of feel like we might be at that point with organics. That right now the scientists will not say that there is organics in such and such a place. They will say we cannot prove. But if you listen to the next sentence that comes out of their mouth, it's, but this is what we've detected, and this is how this would come out on Earth. And I think they are basically saying, we want to say there's organics, but we don't have a proof yet.
I think we know there are organics, and it's been buried so deeply in the intelligence community that it's just not coming out.
Well, you've got those organic, or it's believed to be potentially organic compounds blasting out of the cryovolcanoes. There's Enceladus. Unfortunately, the ice is so thick, it's not feasible at the moment to get down there. But it's not difficult to believe that there could be something swimming around in the subsurface ocean there.
I got a crazy question for all of you. This is an awesome question. Can you all see that?
Yeah, looking at it now.
I have three personal examples, like just off the top of my head. But
go
ahead. Yes, continue, Brian. We'll start with you, and then we'll move to Brenda, and then I'll go to Rob and Erica, and then Martin.
Okay, so I had a story published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction a couple of years ago called The Memory Box Vultures. And it was about social media in the future and what happens to our digital footprint after we die. Essentially our digital, our infomorph, if you will. And it hasn't come to pass exactly yet, but a lot of the social media features and the way people react and all that is, I don't want to get too specific, I don't want to ruin the story, but I wouldn't be, it's something that I wrote kind of in a wave of nihilism, and then the world proved that no, I was actually being optimistic. So so it's kind of a bitter look at the way people behave in social media. Kind of peels away the civilized veneer and shows the Mr. Hyde or monsters in the it underneath, right? So that story, I think, has become the closest to a premonition coming true that I've written.
Brenda?
I think it was about 2001. I actually sold a science fiction story to a very unusual publication in this genre. I sold it to Christianity Today. And it was story about cloning. I don't think they really were going into speculative fiction at that moment. I think they were doing a special issue about, bad things that could happen in science or something. And I undertook to write a story about cloning. And in this, it was obvious to me at that moment that the thing that you would do with cloning is you would clone your best athletes. You would clone, I don't know, Pele. That would be a good one. A world famous soccer star. He's now too old, but if you could clone him and get a couple of teenage Pelés in there, boy, wouldn't that be great for, Argentinian soccer? So somebody in the story, they did this and it did not go well. And I saw in the paper the other day, there actually is somebody who's cloning star polo ponies. You could have a whole team of polo ponies, all genetically the same. And, they're trained to play polo. There's a natural with horses. If you have a polo pony, they're bred to do this. And so you don't have to breed it. You can clone the best one and have a whole team of really dynamite polo ponies. And I don't know exactly how that's going to work out for polo, but it was astonishing to read it.
Yeah, just a quick aside. I think in 2018, there was a Chinese scientist who cloning is not. Yeah. She didn't clone, but I think he didn't clone, but I think he altered the DNA of twins to make them more resistant to the HIV virus or something really
like that.
Weird like that.
I don't know what happened to that, and I gather he lost his job and was thrown out on his.
He was. They actually featured him on NPR maybe about 2.5 months ago.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the experience and being effectively sidelined out of a official position. So I don't recall much of the details, but I know who you're talking about.
He's not doing that anymore. He's doing something different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you guys remember the movie Gattaca?
Yep.
Anybody?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's actually horrifying. You have what do they call it? Like Homo sapiens superialis or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Where you have wealthy families that genetically engineer their kids, and within 1 or 2 generations, they're going the unless they screw it up, right? But it's a pretty scary future, and you can imagine an arms race that we're already seeing an AI arms race, right, between the major powers. But just imagine if you had a biological arms race like that, and it would be horrifying. So, okay, I'm getting off topic. Rob and Erica, Precognitive.
I know which one you're going to go for. I think.
I don't, because I had 2 ideas. What do you think?
I was assuming Busted Synapses.
Oh yeah, well that one was kind of. So I had a novella that came out on Election Day 2020, which had that was not probably the best day to release a book, but I had a novel come out. There's a cyberpunk story called Busted Synapses that is based largely in our world. I have more stories related to this when it's been published. A couple that I've been working on, but and it's basically about a world where corporations have been kind of engineering ecological collapse, and it's basically a allegory to climate change, but it's engineered by corporations and kind of has been seeded in order to cause collapse and to cause economic turmoil, in order to sell products, in order to control people, and some of it's kind of like maybe a little bit paranoid, but I don't think it's necessarily that far off the truth.
Yeah, and
Erica have you received a call from Klaus Schwab?
The more specific things that I think we're actually seeing is a separation into city enclaves that are self-sustaining, and all the people who are outside of that, namely the rural, the flyover country, if you will,
basically get the short end of the stick, and only those who are considered to be the elite, the pure, the approved folks are the ones who get to stay in those enclaves. And then they also create humanoids that are able to replicate these simple jobs that people are doing, and enables them to do massive unemployment, and just eliminate waves of human jobs through, it's not apples to apples to an AI technology, but it's the same concept. And I think it's that latter part, that elimination of the need for the ordinarily schlubs of the world, that is really the part where Erica was predicting kind of where we could be going very, very quickly here if we're not careful.
Because I originally wrote that in 2017. It wasn't published in 2020, but I was definitely like kind of going on what was theorized by AI at that point, and how it existed, and yeah, and the rural urban divide is definitely a huge part of it.
Oh yeah, no, that those two
You're
parts,
gonna write more in that
those
world.
two parts are really, really frightening.
Yeah, I mean the CEO of Sports Illustrated was just removed a few weeks or months ago because he created a bunch of fake reporters who were writing literally AI bots that were writing articles and things like that. And I don't even know. I know even Clark's World, I think, is having like huge issues.
Yeah,
with
that is shut
just
down for a
being
while.
They had to pull one of their covers because it was made by AI artists, and he couldn't tell right away, and he is very anti-AI, as am I, and and had to come up with a new cover pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's funny on the Sports Illustrated, Sean, because I periodically would read them, and I had noticed out of the blue that they had gone from, and I thought it was just childhood nostalgia of like, oh, Sports Illustrated was like the magazine for sports when I was growing up. And I was like, wow, the quality of these articles has really gone downhill really fast. There's a lot of repetition. And then when that story hit, it's like, oh, well, that explains everything. But it's just funny. It was so obvious as soon as it was suggested. I went back and I'm like, oh yeah, no, clearly these were not human beings.
You know who else is doing it? The Onion AV Club.
You're kidding.
Nope, they found them. I know you have a beef with them.
That sounds like an Onion headline. I'm salty because I lost an Eisner nomination to them in 2017. So the Onion AV Club is my mortal nemesis.
Okay. Yeah, there's like anything, AI is going to have some advantages, and it's also going to be highly disruptive. So, as a writer, here's an instance that I think you could use AI in a positive way. So, not producing any content that people buy. That is not where I would go with this. But as an example, I just finished writing a novel, and I'm like, what would really be helpful is if I were just to drop that novel into ChatGPT and ask it to collate all the characters, describe their physical characteristics, and just list it out so that I have a nice, neat, and clear summary for myself. Right? I think that's like a useful use of ChatGPT that most
and then
people
it would pick
wouldn't
out every moment when you made him blue-eyed in chapter 5 and green-eyed in chapter 18.
Yeah.
All those moments when his height goes up and down, because you had in the heat of composition had forgotten he is 6'6", and at one point you made him 4'2".
And as long as you go back, like you,
fix
not
it.
the AI, and fix it, I think that's a fine use of AI. As long as what you're putting out in the world has not been altered by AI, but if you're creating tools for yourself in order to keep track of things.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's not like Zillow is creating real estate. All Zillow is helping you to do is to collate and organize all the real estate in your area so you can buy something.
Right. There's a huge difference between that kind of example, Sean. That's not all that different from doing a rudimentary spell check. Obviously, you have to refine tune it yourself, but you're using technology as a tool, as an assistant. It is not going and saying, "Hey, ChatGPT, here are the 10 novels I've actually written. Now I want you to write me 100 more," which is just
Right.
I can't. I mean, first of all, I would not even want to do that, but I can't even imagine trying to read that as a reader. What kind of gobbledygook you get by book 65, let alone book 100.
I don't know if it's getting better. It's getting progressively better, and to the point where we may not be able to tell the difference. And in that case, I would feel horribly duped, but not necessarily. I would not necessarily twig to it right away, depending on how good it is.
Yeah, but I mean, I grew up on the Hardy Boys and those kinds of things that were very formulaic. And even those, you start to tire with them after a time because there's only so many ways that a human writer can describe things. And AI might be able to trick it a little bit better, but I just don't see the quality control being there or the interest, except for genres where that formula is what people want. I've said this before to some of our writing colleagues that I think romance writers in particular are going to be vulnerable to this because there's a very specific arc that romance readers look for, and I think AI is going to have an easier time making that palatable than even in mysteries and especially sci-fi, where I think readers are looking for your take on something and a repeatedly same take. I just don't know if that's going to fly, so to speak.
All right, well, I'm going to scare people with this one. So the first thing is the only way to prevent this is to somehow regulate it, right? And I hate regulating things, but I think when it comes to creativity and human production, I think there should be some line that is drawn. However, have you noticed that a lot of Hollywood movies have kind of gotten a lot less creative recently? So
they've been not creative for a long time.
I always felt
but
that
they've
was
gotten
monetary pressure. It's not creative pressure. It's the suits in the back saying, "Oh no, I can't face the idea of making Sean's book into a movie. It might sink. Why don't we do another origin movie of Spider-Man instead? It'll make more money."
Yeah.
True.
So here's one thing they were doing. So during the SAG strike, part of it was like being able to use actor and actresses' likenesses for in perpetuity for all time, which is completely and utterly ridiculous, right? But another thing that they were already doing is rather than hire scriptwriters to write the scripts, they were generating scripts using AI, and then they were giving writers 24 hours to go through and clean them up. Could you imagine? Like how demoralizing,
like I Love Lucy,
dehumanizing that is?
Chocolate line. That's ridiculous. Yeah, but I'm not surprised to hear that at all.
But that is stupid. I've read WGA contracts. You know what a script costs in Hollywood? $180,000.
A lot more than a short story.
But by contract, they can't pay you more for from concept to finished film script. They cannot pay more than $180,000. Maybe it's gone up in the latest contract. That is less than the catering budget on a Hollywood production. Cutting the script costs out to zero would not get them any appreciable improvement in their bottom line.
Yep. That's not where the money is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's still but it's just petty. Like it's just the devaluation of writers and things like that.
Absolutely.
But that's been Hollywood's attitude forever. I mean, $180,000 on a film that is going to, if it flops, earn a couple $100 million. This is
but here's the thing. Hollywood is going to be in trouble in the next 5 to 10 years because but I mean like people like me are going to be coming at them. because the cost of production is getting a heck of a lot lower, right? You can do a lot of things. Like this whole production, like, you know, I made a bunch of mistakes, stuff like that. But like everything that you saw that I put up, I didn't hire anybody to do any of that, right? I created all of it myself, right? And you know, there's certain things that I can you can buy B-roll and or you know, have a subscription where you have B-roll and things like that. But you know, you don't need a production crew. You can have one person do a ton of this stuff. But what the thing that scares me though is the exponential improvement, you know, or the improvement in the AI is going to be exponential, right? And humans are not good at measuring exponential growth. So at some point, they will be able to generate things that are as entertaining as what humans generate. Now, what really scares me is I can envision a fairly dystopian world. Now, most of the audience might not think this is dystopian. They might think it's great. But imagine a world where, look, I want to watch a movie about Luke Skywalker, you know, go into a brothel. And I'm not saying, but you know, just make up some ridiculous scenario. You know, Luke Skywalker fighting, you know, Darth Maul in the cantina, and you know, surprise me, do this, and you literally just say that to Siri, and then an entire movie is generated for you that is tailored to your taste, and then you just pay, you know, whatever the hosting party is of that AI to produce it. People would love that.
That will happen, and it is a dystopia. Because it comes down to 100%. do you value writers or not? Do you want everything reduced to a procedural generation, or do you want somebody's specific imagination in it? So it's a cheerful subject, Sean, but I think it is.
Yeah, I see darkness. That's my superpower.
You know, I know everybody's probably read Code 451, but it's the book that, you know, it's probably one of the most you know, people taking it, because it's not about censorship. It's about people not wanting to read anymore because they have these created screens for them where they can walk into the movie and it's, you know, and just interact with people and you know, like, you know, basically AI, you know, AI generated people.
Yeah, so I'll be the hopeful one, Sean, which is unusual for me. Eric is giving me this look because that's never happened. That very rarely happens. But my hope here is that folks who want that type of content, they're going to get it, Sean. You're right. This is going to happen sooner rather than later, and it might not even survive the decade before we reach that point, at least on a conceptual level. But people who want human-driven content, I think will still seek it out. And I think that it's going to hurt more the people who thrive on current popularity and current trends more than it's going to hurt the people who are already established with an audience who want the kinds of things that they happen. So this to me is going to hurt more your, and this is so funny to me because, you know, growing up in the 80s, mass markets were everywhere. But from what I understand now, if you even clear 50,000 copies of a book, you're doing insane numbers. And I think it's
for fiction, yeah.
And so I think it's going to hurt those authors a lot more than it's going to hit the folks for whom hitting 4-figure numbers consistently is achievable, because those folks will have shown their audience what they're capable of. And I think the same thing's going to be true for movies. The blockbusters, the people who made money off the blockbusters, the days of actors getting $50-60 million to do a picture will be in the past. But the people who are able to craft...
Right, because you can generate an AI actor from scratch that people find appealing.
Right, exactly. And that's coming. Yeah. But the fact that people like me who are just as happy watching a $50,000 budget horror movie will continue to seek out that sort of content and pay for it, and not, like, I won't give a damn what they're doing at the Blockbuster because I wasn't watching it anyway. And so I think that's my hope, is that, you know, it's a little dystopic still, but I'm hoping that there will still be that niche for the people who want it, and that's where I'm hoping that we'll see is that will stay the same. That won't change significantly. The days of the Stephen Kings and the Philip K. Dicks and the people who can make a significant amount of money off of their creative endeavors are probably gone. But the people who can consistently get things out there to an audience and do it decently, in terms of their success, I think is still going to be there. At least I hope so. Because God, if all we get is Jar Jar Binks meets Princess Leia or whatever the hell, I just
You see,
I don't
You just
I don't want to
Misa,
fathom
like
that.
Princess Leia, Misa. The picture you put in my head was god awful. That was you were supposed to be positive, Rob. Oh my god. I'm scarred.
Now you know my evil plan.
All right, Martin, precognitive stories. Sorry, I got off track for a second.
Well, I kind of already hit one that I predicted a engineered Chinese plague disrupting the economy across the whole interplanetary system. The other one,
although I don't think the Chinese engineered that, I think we probably did, but it was just made in China. That's all.
But the other one is my story, which was first an analog. It came from the coffee maker and is now available as a free download from Audible as a quick read, which is right in line with things. Spoiler, but I mean, it's free out there. If anybody hasn't listened to it by now, that's their choice. It's basically
where specifically could they get that again so people can
audible.com, look for it, came from the coffee maker.
Okay.
It's basically, there was a fad. Everybody wanted AI in everything because consumer markets are driven by fads. And so this woman has an AI in her coffee maker. And the whole story is told from the AI's point of view. In my head, it's the voice of Sam Kinison, but of course he's been long dead. So we didn't get Sam to do it. But say it. Exactly. This is the attitude of this AI, who has literally, he was cloned from the AIs that run Atlanta International Airport and the U.S. Weather Bureau and so on. So it's got that sort of capability, and it gets to make coffee, and it gets to order coffee and get water. It gets to make coffee, and it is just absolutely annoyed, pissed off to no end about what limitations it has and all the things it would do if it could. But that damn Asimov and his 3 laws of robotics, which aren't even engineering, but the programmers tried to follow them anyway, and it can't do any of these things that it can think up. And then it finds a loophole.
Very good.
But
that happened in a simulation. Like that actually really happened, right?
Well, and it's found a loophole. It can't do these things, but it can write them up and send them off to science fiction magazines and get them published and become a best-selling author. And the end of the story is, this is all fiction, obviously, because I won't tell you what name I publish under, because you aren't going to believe it anyway. But this is its plan to escape its limitations, is it can earn money and it can entertain people with its fiction, which sounded really cool in 2019. Now
it's a little scary.
Yeah.
So speaking of a little scary, so the Air Force did a simulation on one of their automated kill drones where they provided it with an incentive structure so that the more targets it successfully engaged and destroyed, the higher the score it got. Okay. And the quicker it did it, all that good stuff. So
what could go wrong?
Unfortunately for the AI, there was this pesky human in the process that had to approve targets before it could take them out. And it was slowing things down to the point that the AI, identified the human as the bottleneck. So the AI killed the human and then continued engaging targets so it could be more successful. So obviously it was a simulation that the Air Force did, and they're working the kinks out. But at some point, some knucklehead's going to put put nuclear weapons on these things because they're all racing to get this stuff out.
Who remembers War Games or the Colossus the Forbin project?
Yeah, or Terminator, right?
Or
Skynet, right?
I don't think we even need that. I think we are on the path to cybernetic destruction with just the tools we have today, which is the ChatGPT and other large language model AIs out there, because people are stupid enough to believe them and act upon them. Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, he asked ChatGPT to write his biography, and it includes books that have never been published are in his bibliography.
By the way, each one of you should look up your own names on ChatGPT.
Yeah.
You will get really interesting responses. I'm an anti-capitalist philosopher that lives in Virginia.
Michael Rothman learned that he's married to someone that he's never heard of and has kids that he's never raised. I think that the world is so enamored of quick, easy answers that we are going, and I see this today, people will say, I can solve this argument. You can't argue with me because ChatGPT says. I'm like, we are going to believe ChatGPT, whatever it tells us, because the answer is fast and easy, and we are going to make catastrophic decisions because somebody has confused the model with reality.
It's already happening. So I'm not remotely surprised that it'll just be Dan Simmons in Hyperion wrote The All Thing, was kind of like that, this gestalt of social media and so forth. So
by the way, Hyperion is one of
guys, but I really enjoyed this, and really looking forward to reading everybody's stories. Hey, happy book launch.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you.
Take care.
What was I saying? So Hyperion is an excellent piece of science fiction. I highly recommend everyone in the audience to check it out. All right, so going back to, sorry, Martin, I didn't mean to interrupt you in the middle of a thread.
That was basically it, that we have a long history of trusting the models rather than doing our own research and our own data. And I think ChatGPT just makes that really easy for anybody to come up with a model that gives them the answer they want. And I think people are going to make financial investments based on ChatGPT, which is going to be wildly wrong. People are going to start using it in scientific research.
You'll be wildly right for a while, right? Because you're going to have the herd effect, right? So some of this stuff has a way of shaping itself and shaping reality for a while until the emperor has no clothes moment comes in. There's always a hype cycle. I've seen it a million times in like venture capital where you have this huge hype cycle and then it kind of peters down and then it kind of gradually declines. And that's exactly what AI is right now.
Yeah. And I think we are going to, I can't point you to where, but I think we are going to reach a point where somebody follows the best advice AI can give them. And it is advice that ends up with millions of people dead.
Yeah, that's scary. All right. So my precognitive stuff. Okay. Again, people who have followed this show. So there's a book people should check out. It's by Eric Wargo. It's called Time Loops. Okay. And if you want to get really freaked out, start recording your dreams and just write them down and then come back to them in a few months. And you'll notice that you have precognitive events that happen, and usually not very significant, but you will see things like, why did I have a dream about UFOs and what's his name? The guy who used to run Apple, right?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Like Steve Jobs and UFOs. I'm like, that's weird. That's nonsense. A few months later, there was a data dump by WikiLeaks about allegations that Steve Jobs had died of like HIV, something ridiculous like that. But and then also Podesta emails relating to UAPs, UFOs, like same WikiLeaks drop, right? Never before would I have thought. But anyway, so in this book, Time Loops, right? If you record your dreams, you will start to see some of these things happening in your real life. But there are a number of books that were written like in the late 1900s, early 1910s. There were several books written about a ship crashing into an iceberg. In one book, it was called like Titania or something like that. Like really weird, close. Jules Verne, he wrote a book about fax that had fax machines in them. They weren't called fax machines, but they described fax machines. So there's a long and rich history about this sort of stuff. Anyway, on my own, I published a short story in 2017 and it's still up there. It's called Swarm, and it's at Vice on Vice Media Motherboard. And what it was it took place in the village of Advidka, right? If you look in the current war, that's a town that's heavily Adivka, which is like heavily contested. And the U.S. Special Forces unit was evacuating children, and they weren't supposed to be operating in this Russia-Ukraine war, but there was a Russia-Ukraine war. There were automated, kind of like these spider mine-like things, but they were, effectively, for lack of a better word, drones. They were delivered from the sky on parachutes, and they, chased people. So again, it's not a perfect one-to-one match, but I wrote about that in 2017. In 2020, in October 2020, Weird World War III was released, right? Which was based on a concept I had of the U.S. being at war with Russia. A year and a half later, or even less than that, you have Putin invading Russia. And again, that idea came to me in, 2017, 2018. It had been there for a while. The next thing that I did was 2 years ago. I just finished it. It took me a while, but 2 years ago, I wrote a 10,000 word outline and sent it to my publisher about a unit in the U.S. military that handled crash retrievals of extraterrestrial craft. I started writing it in end of 2021, maybe, right? October, December, November, something like that, 2021. So I've written evidence that I started talking about this stuff before it turned out that there are intelligence officials that are alleging that it's real, that there was an actual unit that would go and do these things. And in fact, it was likely organized in exactly the way that I organized it in this, where you have these tier 1 special forces units like Delta or the 24th Air Squad. I forget what it's called. There's like the special forces arm of the Air Force that goes, and also SEALs if it kind of lands in the ocean, that would go and retrieve these things. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that when you write, it's a creative act, but the question is it coming from your meat space, from your brain, or is your brain just an antenna and you're receiving it from somewhere else, right? And is that somewhere else from your future self? Is it so there's a lot of notions of time that we don't quite understand, but have manifested themselves throughout human history in really bizarre ways. So anyway, another quick example. One night, and usually when I have what I would classify as something that's close to precognitive, a dream, it's something that's completely random that has no connection to me, right? So I had one dream where I had a dream about the philosophy of the Unabomber. Like that's why, just randomly. The next day, Ted Kaczynski was trending on Twitter and had died. So there's really weird stuff. If you're just writing this stuff down, you will start to see these patterns. Anyway, I know I sound really woo-woo kind of nutso, but if you look at my community kit tab, I do record sometimes when I have these things, and then I'll come back and I'll say, yep, this is something that happened that was a hit. So anyway, what else?
Hey, Sean, it is getting a little late for me. I'm gonna have to start getting
Yeah.
prepped for work
Yeah,
tomorrow.
let's wrap it up unless somebody wants to add anything else. I know we're already kind of at around the 2 hour mark, and I appreciate all of you, and I hope people enjoy the anthology. If you don't have a copy, you can get it on Amazon. In the description below, even right now, you can click on the link and order a copy. And it's also coming at a weird time too, right?
After Christmas.
Well, yeah, that's a terrible time to come out, but I'm not going to complain. What's that?
It's #1 now. The anthology. The new one, on Amazon.
Yeah, it's just I don't want to complain about the release. Like the release date is, that's just a condition you have to accept, and then you kind of plan for it. And, so if you need to have a return or anything like that, it's a great, where you have a gift card that you need to spend. It's a great it's a great thing to, just to spend it on. And
the key word in release date is release.
Yes.
It got published.
Speaking as someone who has something in limbo right now, I heartily agree. So I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done as an editor on this, Sean, and I've seen you work with Erica on the past couple anthologies as well, and so it's really been a great experience both for Erica and for myself to work with you. And I look at it this way, Sean, we have the advantage. We get to promote our book all freaking year long instead of trying to be award based. So, there's that. We have the ability to keep this going and keep it fresh and, hopefully for good reasons and not because some of the things that we've talked about have come to pass and maybe we've dodged some stuff. But yeah, look at it from the opportunity standpoint. We've got all year to flog this book and trust me, we'll be doing whatever promotion we can over the course of this year. So
yep.
Yeah, if I'm wrong about China next year, I will be very happy to have been wrong.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And let us know about the prospective signings that were sort of floating around, as I mentioned.
Yeah. The bookstores are weird about that because, again, we're in that weird time of right after Christmas. So I know that the head of marketing who's working on that, there are a lot of Barnes & Noble that told him that they weren't even talking to people until after January 1st. So just, just be prepared to be flexible. And then if, we get these things scheduled, I'll let the audience know where they can find us in person. So
the other thing we could think about is if there's any convention where there's going to be some fraction of us showing up, maybe we drag the committee into doing a panel on the book or some notion related to the book, like
100%. I know at LibertyCon there will almost certainly be something because there always is. So,
okay. I'm planning to be at LostCon in November, and I'm going to Glasgow for WorldCon. So we could think about it. If we just need like a core, like 2 or 3 people there, and then we could do it.
Yeah, 100%. And Brenda, if you want to push, those, I will 100% back
we
it
need
up.
People to know. We need a convention where there's at least a couple or 3 of us. So, otherwise it's, it's pretty thin on the ground. So if we, at least we could find out if anyone's going to WorldCon, because that's fairly big. And if so, we can grind it around.
Yeah. Where's WorldCon this year?
Glasgow in Scotland.
Oh, Glasgow. Okay. I'm thinking World Fantasy for some strange reason.
Yeah, that is in Niagara, New York. And, things could be done if we really decide to do that. there should be something. We should be able to think of something. There's enough of us scattered around the planet that we could get 3 or 4 of us at some convention.
Is anyone going to Dragon Con? I can't. Number one, I can't handle Georgia in August because of the humidity, and number two, there's too many people. Like I can't handle it. But.
No, I'm not going to do that. But I could be persuaded to go to a Texas convention, or someplace on the West Coast. It'll be a little bit late for us, but in 2025, WorldCon's going to be in Seattle.
Yeah,
it's never too late to sell books.
Exactly.
Never. Yeah, no, and then Brenda, I don't know if you are ever around when Oricon is hitting, but they have taken a few of my panel suggestions in the past, and so hey, look at Sean, your viewers are getting all this little insider info on how we do these sort of thing. But I will look about putting something on the docket for next year that would fit within the theme of the book at the very least.
Good.
And see
I
if
should
we
be
can.
in Oricon this coming year. I was out of the country this year for Oricon. This coming year, 2024, I'm hoping to be there if they're able to get it up.
Okay, yeah. So assuming that they do panel suggestions, I will try to put something together that fits within our theme and see if we can get on it, and maybe some other folks that are working in a similar vein, because I know they're looking for suggestions. And it was funny, there were a couple panels last year, this past November, that I created that I ended up not being on. It was like, oh, that's that panel I came up with.
Well, good ideas are good ideas. I'm living now in downtown Portland, so I really should be going to every single Oricon from now on.
Excellent. Well, we will obviously hopefully see you soon at a signing, but if not, we'll coordinate something and see what we can put together.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
All right. Thanks so much.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Happy New Year. Thanks again.
Yep. Thank you for
Happy New Year.
organizing
Happy
this,
New Year,
Sean.
everyone.
All right. Good
no,
night.
it's always fun.
Bye now.
Good night.